I'd say that it's fairly common to hear the phrase, it's smart to shop around, not just in relation to business, but in relation to anything you're going to buy or something that you're going to invest in. It makes sense to shop around and make sure that you're getting a good deal. But as a business owner, when it comes to getting advice in your business, is shopping around a smart strategy or is there an element of sabotage? Surprise! I have an opinion on this one. Let's dive into the episode. This is episode number 497 of the Heart Center Business Podcast. So you can find all the relevant links and the show notes of today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/497. It's also the last day of Tashmas. This is day 12 of Tashmas, and I have one last Tashmas gift just for you that I will share at the end of today's episode. So let's answer this question. Is shopping around for business advice smart or is it a sabotage? Let's break it down. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I actually agree that there are a lot of cases where shopping around is a very smart thing to do, particularly when it comes to business advice. Let's face it, not all business mentors and advisors are created equal, and there is huge differences in pricing points as well. You can still get business coaching and strategy sessions for $100 to $150 a session, all the way up to $15,000, $20,000, sometimes $50,000 for a session. And so there's a lot of price variation. There's also a lot of strategic variation. And so in essence, shopping around is smart. Now, as a little aside, I once went TV shopping with my partner, Davey, when we were first dating. I went to stay at his house on the Sunshine Coast. I think we'd been dating for like 3 months. And so one weekend he said, I need to buy a TV. Do you want to come and look at TVs with me? And I was like, yes, that sounds great. And we went to every TV shop on the Sunshine Coast. Every TV shop. Not only that, we bought a TV. And then as we were going to go to Coles, the supermarket, to go and get supplies for dinner that night, we happened to go past a store that he'd forgotten existed. And I was like, well, you've already got a TV, so we don't need to go in there. And he's like, no, let's go have a look. And there was a TV that was in there that was the specifications that he wanted, that was $25 cheaper than the one that he had just bought. So we went and returned the one that he had just bought. And then we bought the one. And I was like talking to my flatmate the next week and I was like, is this a red flag? Like, I really feel like there's something wrong. I don't know if I can be with someone like this. Oh my gosh. Anyway, another fun fact, David told that story in his speech at our engagement party as a reason why I'm a good deal, because he likes to shop around. Anyway, it didn't go particularly well at first. He rescued it in the end with some really, really lovely sentimentality. But oh my gosh, there were people saying, this is not a good speech, you need to stop. They were yelling at and heckling him halfway through his speech. But I'll tell that whole story another time. Anyway, I'm definitely a fan of shopping around, but let's not be a Davy. Is that a fair thing to say? I think that's a fair thing to say. So, where does the shopping around have a component of self-sabotage? Because I actually think the answer is both, right? Shopping around for business advice is smart, but there is a point at which it becomes a sabotage. And how do you differentiate and discern whether your desire to shop around is a sabotage or it's just smart discernment? In addition, if you've found something and you just want to buy it without shopping around, How do you discern whether that is a smart decision or that might be your form of sabotage? As I said before we jumped in, I do have an opinion on this and I want to break it down. I'm going to do it in 3 different ways. So the first one is that shopping around isn't just about paying money. I also see that sometimes shopping around is advice shopping or advisor shopping in the people that you're following. And in most cases, I think following a range of different people is a really smart idea. I love a diverse range of voices. I love hearing from a range of different perspectives. I love hearing from people who have a low ticket model, who have a high ticket model, who use Instagram as their primary, who use Facebook as their primary platform. I definitely like to follow a lot of different corners of the market and a lot of different people who have different strategies and different ideas. And, they're tapped into a different part of the market in a lot of cases as well. I don't want to get myself caught in a bubble where I feel like this is happening for everyone. And it's actually not. It's just that I'm not following a wide enough range of different people. But I also want to ensure that I can stay across those different areas of expertise. Often when I'm following a range of different people, it's not following, for example, 16 course creation experts for 16 different opinions on course creation. Instead, I'm looking for those different components. So I'll follow a couple of systems people. I'll follow a couple of productivity experts. I'll follow a couple of mindset practitioners. I'll follow a couple of social media people. I'll follow a couple of people who specialize in copy and messaging. I'll follow a couple of people who specialize in websites and technology. So you can see there that I'm not actually following 16 people who all have the same focal point, and now I'm going to have a battle of opinions in my feed. Instead, I'm looking for all those different areas of business, all those different areas of marketing, and different people will have different perspectives on those areas. So I'm staying across those different areas of expertise, and it allows me to tap into those different views and viewpoints. But following too broad of a set of different people or following too many different people at some points can be a sabotage. One of those examples for me was in the 2016-2017 period where I was so fixated on what everyone else was doing for passive income, for online courses, for memberships, for products. And I was actually having this real sense of needing to keep up with what everyone else was doing. And so by the end of 2017, I had over 30 different ways that people could work with me, different products. I'd launched 2 different books. I'd had retreats. I had lots of different courses. I really scattered my product suite. And upon reflection, it was because so many different people were saying, this is the key to huge growth in this period of time. No, this is the key to huge growth. No, this is the key. And in reality, I could have made any of those individual strategies work, but by spreading myself across so many different products, not one of them really did that well. In fact, the one that did the best that year was the Takeoff program, and I spent the entire year neglecting the Takeoff program because I was so scattered with all the different people that I was following. And so at the end of 2017, I did a huge review of all my different products and services. I culled a lot of them. I closed a lot of them down. And I also unfollowed a bunch of people. And I actually think a lot of the people that I was following who got me really excited about all these different things weren't necessarily people I had originally followed because I wanted to learn strategy from them. I'd followed them because we were peers. I met them at events, or we were in a course together, or they were members of a mastermind that I was in. And so I was getting almost a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, or trying to keep up with my peers and thinking that all of them are working out all these amazing things. I need to do these strategies as well. And so there was a great unfollowing at the end of 2017, not because I didn't like those people anymore, not because I didn't want to be peers with them anymore. I still maintained that connection and that friendship in other ways, but I couldn't keep seeing them sharing what they were doing and what they were creating and all of their new products and not get caught up in feeling like I needed to do that too. And so that's where the shopping around by following so many different people actually turned into a bit of a sabotage for me. So one of the things I now do quite regularly is I review my feed on social media and especially in my inbox to be mindful about who I'm following now and who am I taking advice from, who am I keeping an eye on what they're doing because I'm curious about it or I think that there might be something exciting coming, who am I following and what is the influence on my sense of confidence in my own strategy. So I'm just making sure that I'm not opening myself up to that risk as much. But the second and more important thing that I do quite consistently as well is I ensure I am building my confidence in my strategy and I'm keeping my strategy right in front of my face. Because if I know what my plan is and I know what my strategy is and I feel confident that if I see that through, it's going to result in the growth that I want, I'm far less likely to get wobbly when I see someone doing something else that I'm not doing. I'm far less likely to get derailed and distracted by a side quest going off to do the thing that they're doing or investigate the thing that they're doing when I'm really solid in what I am planning and what I am doing. And I definitely saw that when lots and lots of people were playing with AI in the early days, and also when people were starting to teach AI and run webinars on how to train AI and how to do your messaging through AI and all of those sorts of things. And if I wasn't so strong and resilient in my own strategy, I could absolutely see myself thinking that in order to stay in that early adopter space, in order to stay relevant, in order to be an advisor that people wanted to work with, I had to get across this AI thing. I would have to teach AI. I would have to teach people how to use AI for messaging rather than writing their messaging themselves, or I would have to go down that pathway. But instead, because I'm so clear on my strategy and I'm confident in its capacity to deliver the results that I'm looking for, my exploration of AI has just been from curiosity around using it for myself, understanding how other people use it, looking in depth at the risks and benefits of AI and using it in certain contexts in the business. And so I haven't derailed my messaging, derailed my strategy, completely shifted the core thing or the core way that I'm bringing people into my business. And I actually think it's worked really well for me. And I am seeing growth upon growth upon growth in my business without having to dive deep into that. And so I think those two pieces go hand in hand. I'm strategic about making sure I'm not getting too much clutter in my feed and I unfollow and unsubscribe very regularly, as well as really building my belief in my existing strategy and having that strategy smack bang in front of my face so I cannot ignore it or be distracted by something else being in front of my face that isn't within that strategic framework. So that is just followership, right? And I think a lot of following lots and lots and lots of different people is part of the reason why we then feel like we need to shop around when it comes to buying things. But the big piece for me when it comes to shopping around for a specific service or product, so let's say that I want to learn how to create and launch an online course. If I'm shopping around because I want to learn how to create an online course and launch it, it's really hard to compare apples with apples, right? It's not as simple as Davey trying to buy a TV, although you wouldn't think it was simple if you witnessed Davey and I going and buying that TV. But anyway, I probably shouldn't have told that story. Anyway, so it's not that simple and straightforward, because learning how to create a course and launch a course from someone who's really focused on the marketing side and not particularly focused on good course creation is going to be very different to buying from someone who's an adult learning expert, who's mostly focused on creating a course people will actually finish and has high quality outcome delivery. And they're not necessarily as focused on how you sell the course. They'll tell you how to launch it, but that's not the core focal point of that program. So both of those programs create and launch a course, but they're not the same. And so it's really challenging to compare sometimes. And there comes a point where the more you shop around, the more confused you'll be and the more time you'll waste. So if I'm shopping around for a very specific service or product, something I want to learn, something specific that I want to do, what I will do is I will find 3 or 4 people who teach that particular outcome. I'll look at what the focus is of most of their content. So if someone has a lot of content about adult learning principles, about getting courses completed, about making sure you're delivering on outcomes when it comes to course creation, well, I can see that they're focused on the delivery side, right? They're really focused on making sure the course is going to do a good job. If most of their content is about how many sales people are making, it's about the launch process, it's about using innovative marketing strategies, well, I know that they're not necessarily going to have a high focus on the delivery side of the course creation. And so that is important, right? So number one, I'm following 3 or 4 different people who offer services in that space. But what I will also do is sign up to freebies, get into their funnel, right? Because for me, what's really important when I'm comparing different providers is how do they treat me in the sales process, and to what extent do their sales and marketing process align with consent-based marketing? Because if they're using a lot of trickery and psychological tactics, they're using a lot of manipulation, they're sending 17 emails in 6 days, guess what's going to be in the thing that they teach me? They're going to teach me to do the same. And therefore, if I don't follow what they teach, I'm highly unlikely to have the results that they are proffering. But also, even if I do follow what they teach, if it feels like it's out of values alignment for me and it's not consent-based marketing, then chances are I'm not going to actually be in congruence with that. And so it's not going to work for me as well. I mean, I don't ever see myself consciously choosing to implement those strategies. But even if I did, I would feel so repelled by my own stuff that I would absolutely sabotage it working. And so there are lots of different things that I'm comparing when I am shopping around for a specific product or service. I'm not just comparing on price. I'm comparing on how their product or service meets my needs and aligns with my values and fits what I feel is the right delivery mode for what I want to do as well. In a lot of cases, I'd prefer to work with someone one-on-one and just get the answers really fast and get their eyes on what I'm doing and their advice on exactly what I'm doing, rather than spend 12 weeks learning it module by module. There are some cases where I love spending 12 weeks learning it module by module, but it's not always the case. So I think it's very dependent on what it is that you're looking to purchase And whether you've already got a very specific idea about what it is that you want to do, what is it that you want to learn, what is it that you want to implement or change or work on, and being really clear and specific about what are the decision points for you. So the decision points for me would be, is it a consent-based practice? Do I see myself using the marketing strategies that are being used to market to me? Is there a lot of access to the actual expert who's creating all of this content? Or am I going to be expected to kind of go it alone, which I don't enjoy as much? Is there any community connection piece where I can actually, brainstorm or co-work with other people doing the process at the same time? Is there an opportunity to do this one-on-one? Price point, there's lots of different factors that I'm taking into consideration. But price point kind of becomes the last one when I am clear on what it is that I'm buying. And so shopping around is very different when it's something that is as complex and involved as that and has so many different options for delivery, for strategy, for support mechanisms, for community, right? So that's going to be tougher to compare different products versus if I'm looking for a new calendar tool, for example. Well, a new calendar tool, as long as it's got the core functions that I'm looking for, then it kind of comes down to price most of the time for things like that. So yes, shopping around is definitely a smart thing to do, and particularly where the people that you're mostly learning from, there's something that doesn't click or there's something that doesn't really sort of vibe for you. Looking around to find someone who is more your vibe or is more aligned for you can be really helpful. Here's another big one where I do that. So sometimes I'll get really excited to learn something in relation to a strategy or work with a certain person. But when I watch their social media, especially if they use Instagram and they do Instagram stories, when I'm watching their social media, when I'm hearing what they're saying about what they're up to this week, when I see their posts talking about what they're doing, there's a huge portion of them that work far too hard for my liking. It's not my vibe, right? And I used to think, I can find like the easy way to do this, or I can find, a more strategic way to do this so that I'm not having to work as hard as they have to work. But more and more, I've recognized that even just being in the energy of someone who's got that really hardcore hustle mentality, it actually is not a good energy for me to spend too much time in. And so I'm paying attention to some of those lifestyle factors as well. Now, I'm child-free. I don't have children. And I know that for some mums, they'd rather work with someone else who's a mum because there's a belief or a perception or, there's some real factors of like, I don't understand. And I totally understand that that would be a reason, that would be a factor for some people. Now, I live my life in a very spacious and very ease and time sensitive driven way. And so for some people, that's enough, right? They know that I'm not a parent, but they also know that I don't work 40 hours a week. And for them, that's the biggest factor, is that as a parent, they need someone who respects and acknowledges and understands that parenting has time restrictions on it and also can sometimes mean things need to be changed at the last minute. There needs to be far more flexibility. I totally understand that. For me as a buyer, even though I'm child-free, I'm often more drawn to working with parents, especially parents who are the primary parent, because I know they've got other stuff going on. So they're not spending 40 to 60 hours a week working in their business. And also, if it's not parents, it's people who have a very spacious and abundant lifestyle. So I think about people like Amanda Rootsey, who does gentle business, Sinead Carey, who lives her life in such congruence with her message of like being a whole human and really looking after yourself and living an adventurous life. So those kinds of people who I know that they are really congruent with that sense of, let's not make up 80 hours worth of work a week because we feel like we need to hustle and like squeeze every inch out of this week. That's definitely not my vibe. Oh, another person who comes to mind actually is Claire Kerslake. So I know from her content and also having worked with her as a client before, she spends time on her property. She's got an amazing rainforest and they're regenerating land there. She's also very conscientious about making sure she's spending time looking after her body and having lots of downtime. And so I really love that. Julie Parker as well. She's constantly in the garden showing us her beautiful flowers, and she has such a spacious and abundant life. They are the kind of people I vibe with. And so that's far more likely to be someone that I'll buy from. And that's a much more important factor for me compared to price. Because if you think about it, like, let's make up a random scenario, but if I could pay $495 to learn from someone who is burnt out, I know that they have 55 things on their to-do list every day, they're constantly online, they're constantly saying how busy they are, or I can pay $5,000 to work with someone who lives this abundant, spacious life, they take things really slow, they're very strategic, they're very mindful. I'd rather pay more money and get the advice from the person who's found out a way to do it in a really spacious way. Because for me, that's aligned with my values. My values are far more connected with the type of lifestyle that I want to lead than it is to save the money and find the cheapest option. But I know there are other people, for them, finding the cheapest option is aligned with their lifestyle values, because for them, keeping as much profit as possible from their business is critical to them, and that is the thing they measure their success by. And so they're happy to work with the person who might be a little bit more hustly, a little bit more rushed, and save themselves a bunch of money, and that is an alignment for them. And no one is better than the other, right? It's about getting clear on what is critical for you. So for most people, the shopping around shouldn't start until you've done that inner work, that reflection on what is the vibe you're going for here? What specifically is it that you're looking to purchase? What specifically are you looking for help with? And what is it aligned with your current strategy that you've already made decisions about? And then the final area that I want to explore, where it goes from smart to sabotage, is actually shopping around for opinions on something specific. And I've actually had the situation before where someone's come to a call with me and they've said, I've already asked this person, I've already asked this person, but I'm trying to make a decision about whether I should do A or B, and I really am interested in your opinion as well. And I said, well, what did those two people say to you that you didn't want to hear? Because the only reason you would come for a third opinion is because neither of them gave you the answer that you wanted. So what is the answer that you want? We then had the most amazing conversation about what the answer was that they wanted and why they wanted that answer. And we actually, instead of deciding between one of two things, we actually crafted a completely different strategy for that person that aligned with what it was that they wanted and why they wanted it that way. And so I think that that's a really good example, because I just see a lot of people buying things because they were told that they needed to do that thing, or buying things because they went to a webinar about one thing and then the upsell was this other thing, and they just somehow got convinced that this other thing was critical to their success and they needed to buy it straight away. Or they got advice or they bought something, they didn't like what they were being told, and so they're actually going around and advice shopping, and they know what they want to hear, but they just don't realize that they're looking for external validation of an internal decision that they've already made. And so in that instance, sometimes what you don't need is strategy. Like, you actually need to talk to a mindset person. You need to actually, get in the room with someone, maybe someone who can help you with that balance between the two, so that you're making a smarter strategic decision for you, rather than just seeing it as like two very distinct choices and there's no wriggle room or creativity for how you might be able to, create something that's actually aligned with what it is that you want. So hopefully that has helped you with a little bit of that discernment of where it becomes sabotage, where it is smart. Ultimately, what I would say is that it becomes a self-sabotage if it stops you seeing a specific strategy you're already doing through, and it stops you from getting to the point where you can actually get some meaningful data, make some adjustments, go again, get the second lot of data, and then make a strategic decision from there. If you're not at that stage of the current strategy you're working on, then shopping around for other strategies, shopping around for other approaches, I think becomes a sabotage. And the problem that you're trying to solve is you're worried that your current strategy is not going to work. But instead of asking the question, how do I make this strategy work? How do I give this the best red hot shot that I can of being super successful for me? You're like, oh, I wonder if this will work. Oh, I don't know if this is going to work. So you're so susceptible to any kind of messaging that plants that seed of doubt, and that makes you think maybe there's something you're missing. Maybe there's something else you should be doing. Maybe this strategy isn't enough. So if the shopping around is stopping you from seeing things through fully, it's stopping you from getting data, making adjustments with that data and going again, then I would say that's where we're probably tipping into sabotage spaces. And then the other one is if it keeps you busy, but it's not necessarily changing much. And I remember an example of this with a biz friend of mine who had an online course, and she was making fairly decent sales of it, maybe 8 people each time she launched, 12 people, then 6 people. But she really wanted that ongoing sustainable income, and she had a lot of people buying the course multiple times to do it. She had a returning price that was much cheaper, and quite a high percentage of people redid the course with her. And so we were talking about it just in a little coffee chat, and I said to her, it sounds to me like this needs to be a membership, because people are learning the process, but they want to do it with you over and over and over again. And so it sounds to me like this could be a membership. And if you do this as a membership, then people are paying you every month. And so every time you launch, you're stacking new members on top of the existing members. And yes, we have to look at making sure you don't have a high churn rate and those sorts of things. But it felt like it really lended itself to more of a membership model. So she changed it to being a membership, and she did a big launch of it. And it was an amazing launch, and she did really well. Most of the people who'd previously bought the course jumped straight into the membership. It was exactly the thing that they wanted. Plus also she got quite a few new members. I think she ended up with 40 something people who bought in that first launch of the membership. And then after 3 months, I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, now I want to see you do another launch. And if we're going to get another 30 or 40 people in there, amazing. This is going to be spectacular. And she said, well, actually, I've been looking around because I'm really struggling with getting people to come to the calls. And I've played around with doing the calls at different times. I have also been doing check-ins with people to see if they're actually implementing. And I'm really worried because I don't think people are actually completing this as much as they used to do when it was a course. It had a start date and it had an end date. And so I had much more active participation from all of the people inside the course. And so I've been talking to a few different business coaches, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back into a course, but I'm going to make it a higher price course, and I'm going to make it go for a little bit longer. And so she was going to change all of this up. So she went about turning her membership back into a course. And she went out and she launched it, and she made 15 sales of the course. It was a fairly decent course launch. But at the end of the course, all of these people were saying, when's the next round? When can we do this again? I want to do this with you more consistently. And so then she went and started shopping around, and we were biz friends and we were peers. And so I'd never kind of pitched myself to be her mentor or anything along those lines, because I was just a lovely sounding board for her. And she came to me probably 6 months later. We had a Zoom catch up because she lives in a different country to me. And she's like, oh my gosh, I've just been working with this amazing person and they're going to help me relaunch my membership. And so she flip-flopped from course to membership to course to membership. And I just said to her in that session, in that Zoom call, is this sabotage? Are you keeping yourself really busy? Why don't you want this thing to really rocket up and have 300 members? And so we ended up having this big in-depth conversation about what are the negative consequences of this thing actually doing a really good job and having lots and lots of members. And she realized that she felt like her capacity to hold space and lead a group of people through this process was about 50 people. So her membership launch, doing so well at the start, actually started to cause panic, but she didn't realize that's what it was, because she was so focused on what's the right strategy. She wasn't asking herself, why do I feel like I need to change my strategy in the first place? This thing worked. Why wouldn't I double down on the thing that worked? And so where you are keeping yourself busy, you're changing things up, but nothing's really getting traction, or the traction you get equals the traction you had with the old strategy, for me, that is such a big sign that there's actually a sabotage at play here rather than this being a smart strategic decision. I also think for quite a few people, there comes a point in your entrepreneurial journey where you kind of know what you need to do. You got your basics sorted. You've got your foundation sorted. You feel more like you're an established business owner. And at that point, it's almost like there's not a lot of strategic input that's going to make a huge difference for you. There's not a shiny, sexy new strategy. There's not a shiny, sexy new product. There comes a point in your entrepreneurial journey, especially as you get established as a business owner. Let's say you start out selling one-to-one packages and then you decide you want to have some kind of program. You get that program launched. You've launched it a couple of times and now there's nothing shiny and new for you, right? There's this phase of business where the most strategic, most effective and most important thing you could do is stabilize what you've got. And it's not particularly fun. It's not particularly shiny and new. And that phase of business is also where you need to transition out of seeing other people as the experts and step into being the expert about your own business. And that can be a scary transition. When I first started my business, I was so used to having a boss that I made my first business coach my boss. And then I started making all my clients my boss. And I had finished up working with my business coach, and I was sort of starting to look around at who might be my next business coach or who do I need to learn from next. But when I got really honest with myself, I knew what I needed to do. And I knew that exploring that and experimenting with that and really embedding that was the best thing for me to focus on doing. But there's also a huge scary mindset component of that there's no one left to defer to. I needed to step into the role of truly leading my business and being my business's best strategic decision maker. And that was a scary transition to make. And it's no surprise to me that a couple of months later, I went to a webinar from a very well-known and well-renowned business strategy mentor, and I got completely bamboozled by this webinar, and I started to really question whether I knew what I was doing in the first place. And I pedestaled that person as being the expert for online business, the person who knew absolutely everything, and they were smarter than me and they were better than me, and I better buy from them and I better work with them because, oh my goodness, how silly of me to think I could do this on my own. And it was one of the most derailing periods of time in my business because I was almost like shopping around for advice from anyone but myself when I needed to actually become a better strategic decision maker in my business. And I actually think upon reflection, if I had hired a new business coach at that point who wasn't necessarily a strategy advisor, they were more focused on helping me to embed my practices, to really systemize what was working and do all the mindset stuff that was coming up along the way, then I would have been far more supported and guided in the right direction for me than making someone else the expert, making someone else that like they know all the answers and they clearly know far more than me. So I just added that last bit in there to just plant the seed that perhaps your desire to do some advice shopping or to shop around for mentorship or to shop around for a new strategy or a new product suite or a new business model or whatever it might be, perhaps that desire to shop around is coming from this fear that if you don't shop around and find someone to really swoop in and help, that you'll have to rely on your own skill set and you'll have to develop that strategic decision-making skill set for yourself. And whilst that might feel scary, that's a really beautiful thing to do. And there are ways that you can get that kind of support without feeling like you're pedestaling someone else or you're making someone else the boss of your business, because this is your time to step into that boss mode. Now, all of that being said, I want to come back to the original question of, is shopping around for business advice smart or is it a sabotage? And I know it's the most frustrating answer because I'm basically saying it depends on your situation. But I do want to say, ultimately, when it comes to shopping around for business advice, don't just shop around based on price. Get really clear on what your non-negotiables are. Get clear on what the factors are that go into decision making for you. And also step away from the influence of all of the shiny and sexy marketing for a minute and ask yourself, what am I actually shopping around for? What am I looking to buy? Why am I wanting to buy it? And is looking to someone else for this business advice the right decision for me? Or am I avoiding making the strategic decision myself? Or am I avoiding building the decision-making skill set for myself? So that's something I've talked about in previous Tashmas episodes recently, where I talk about planning and productivity, and that for a lot of people, learning how to manage yourself is actually the most critical skill that you could develop at this point in time. Learning how to step into CEO mode in your business is actually really important. And that's the next kind of stabilization level of scaling for your business. That's the next growth journey for you as the business owner. Now, something that I haven't talked about a lot on this podcast is the Heart-Centered Business Accelerator. And that is actually the gift that I have for you today. The Heart-Centered Business Accelerator is my mastermind and mentorship program that is for those people who are a little more established in their business and they are recognizing that they no longer need someone to teach them new shiny strategies. They need someone to help them finesse their current strategy so that it is scaling, so that it is growing, and so that they are working strategically and smartly, but they are importantly building that decision-making and strategy skill for themselves. They are not constantly deferring to someone else. So in the Heart Centered Business Accelerator, it is a smaller group offering, and there's a combination of hot seat mentoring calls, co-working calls where we actually are working on getting those things done and really creating that space for the more strategic time in your business, and also having modules to help you with finessing and refining those scaling strategies, but through the lens of making a better strategic decision for you and your business. So looking at the factors that go into the decision-making process and making a good decision for where you're at, what you need, what your business needs at that point in time. So it's mostly for people who are established in business, in that I recommend that if you are considering joining the accelerator, you want to be making some fairly consistent income in your business. And it can be, $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month. But at that point in doing that, you've really bedded down those core pieces of the strategy, and particularly your business model and your product suite. You may have clarity about what your next product is, but you're not looking for that, tell me what the next shiny thing is. You've got a really solid decision about where the business is going, what your product suite is going to look like. And really what you're looking for is that magical combination of mentorship, coaching, accountability, and spaciousness to get those things done without giving someone else the decision-making role in your business. Instead, you're building your decision-making skills. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can still join the accelerator at the founding member price if you join between now and the end of December. I'll have the link to the accelerator information as well as all the details of this special offer with the show notes of today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/497. The accelerator is by application only. So if you get your application in before the end of December, you will be eligible for the founding member price. So make sure you come and check that one out if you feel like this is probably the stage that you are getting to in your business. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Thank you for playing along with Tashmas as well. If you're listening to these episodes when they drop, tomorrow on the 13th of December, I will be doing the prize draws from some of the previous Tashmas episodes. So if there were any episodes that you missed, or you've listened to the episode but you haven't gone and popped your entry in for the competitions, the prize draws, all of those pieces, make sure that you go and do that and check that all out so that you can ensure that you've got everything in time. And the podcast will be returning to regular weekly episodes from here. So thank you so much for joining me for Tashmas. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. And I will see you on the next episode of the podcast, which will be 498. Oh my goodness, we are so close to 500. And if you have questions that you would like me to answer, make sure that you go to tashcorbin.com/question and pop them in ASAP, because for episode number 500 of the podcast, I'm going to be doing a Q&A episode. So if you've got any questions for me, about business strategy, about mindset, about a specific part of your strategy, marketing, social media, launching, courses, business models, whatever it might be, make sure you go to tashcorbin.com/question, pop your question in there. And if you get it in before I'm recording episode number 500, you might just get a shout out from me and I'll be able to answer it in that episode. Thank you so much. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now.